to have a house, have a basilica traditionally built over the house of Peter, and under the apse to find the walls of first century homes. Again, that's about as far as you can push it. We weren't expecting to find a church, and when Motti asked me, my area is certainly not Byzantine history, so I'm all the time having to go back to my library and pull out things and try to fill in the blanks. And so he asked me about it, and I went and found this pilgrimage. I have collections of pilgrimages, and this Bavarian bishop in the 8th century went traveling around the lake, and he speaks about coming to Bethsaida and finding a church built over the house of Peter and Andrew. A number of people believed that the church he was talking about was not at El-Araj, but was at Capernaum, because they had a church in Capernaum. So they just said, oh, he was confused. He didn't know where he was. He was actually talking about the church at Capernaum. And so, and in fact, when we first put forward the idea that this was the church of Willibald, and Motti sent off to a colleague of his, colleague pushed back and said, no, Willibald was confused. He was actually Capernaum. And so Motti asked me, he says, this is a serious scholar. And I go, I said, even serious scholars make mistakes. And I said, you have evidence right in your hand. You have the tessera there. You have something they don't have. They're dealing in just the historical story. And as we dug more and more, we should say it's not just a church, it's a basilica. It's not a small chapel. It's a sizable church. And I think it's
Can you define that real quick, basilica?
Motti?
Basilica is a type of church that has, it's an elongated building, usually entrances to the west, a large apse or 3 apses to the east, 2 rows of columns divided to a main hall, and the nave, and 2 aisles on both sides. That's a basilica. It came from the Roman world, from the Roman basilica, civil basilicas, and became a place of worshipping from the 4th century. And the 4th century is at the time that the basilicas were transferred from a civil structure to be a place of worship in the Christian religion.
So specifically, like a Roman church, you mentioned an apse. That's like the specific. It's like a half circular kind of structure.
Yeah, it's a rounded niche facing to the east.
Facing east, and in the center of it stands the altar.
So it's a important place. Clearly it's not just like a thrown together.
No.
It's a Roman era, very important. Okay.
In the Roman era, the basilica is civil. It's a place of gathering, a place of trials. But in the Byzantine period, when Christianity took over, there was a kind of search. What type of big building will be good for a church? The temple, not good, because people are outside. So basilica is a place where you enter it. So they took the basilica and made it what we call the Christian basilica.
And the importance of it is underscored by the finding of the inscription. Motti made reference to it, the medallion inscription, and which it's a reference to the donor who helped to finance the redoing of the floor, the retiling of the floor, and then it makes it in the middle of it. It then makes reference. It seeks prayer, intercession from, and it calls him the chief of the apostles and the keeper of the keys of heaven. To a Christian community, a Christian reader can be only one person, and that is Peter. And so even those who questioned that this was a church referenced by Willibald built over the house of Peter, as soon as the inscription was found, they said, okay, that's it. This is the church of Willibald, and it traditionally marks the place of Peter's home. As Motti says, that doesn't prove anything. It can, it gives a stronger argument that we're in, at least in Christian tradition, Byzantine Christian tradition, we're in Bethsaida, because that's where, according to John's gospel, he lived. Because I asked Motti, I said, if we have a church, and usually the apse is the area of the most sacred area of the church. And I said, if this is the most sacred area of the church, that usually there's relics and things like that that mark the identification of the church. And if this church is only known as church built over the house of Peter, there should be first century houses underneath the apse. And so we carefully preserved the mosaics of the apse and dug down and found a series of walls, second, third century, but also first century walls there, which again, it doesn't prove, but it's about as strong evidence as you could hope for. I mean, unless you find a plaque that says Peter slept here, that's, that you can't, you're not going to be looking for an inscription, but to have a basilica traditionally built over the house of Peter and under the apse to find the walls of first century homes is that again, that's about as far as you can push it. So
that's pretty significant.
Okay, there were other Jewish villages all over. But if we have on the shore, first of all, on the shore, second, a Christian basilica that is mentioned in historical source as the house of Peter, built over the house of Peter and Andrew. And we have an inscription mentioned Peter. And below it, we have third, second, first century houses. And we have Roman period houses all over. I think that it's almost no doubt that this is the best candidate.
Might want to add that churches that are associated with Peter in the Byzantine period are very rare in the land of Israel. And usually they appear in places where Peter shows up in the Gospels. In other words, some action like St. Peter in Gilicantu in Jerusalem that remembers his denying of the Lord. So it's usually a fairly rare occasion to find a church that's associated with Peter. And there's only one reason you would build a church and have it associated with Peter where we're excavating. And that's because of the belief that we're in Bethsaida, based on John 1:44, that it being the home of Peter, Andrew, and Phillip.
I was curious when I looked into the specific quote of the inscription. I'll read it here real quick. It says, and this is the English translation from your guys' publication, I believe. It says, the whole work of paving the diaconicon with mosaic was done by the zeal of Constantine, servant of Christ, chief of the apostles, and holder of the keys of the heavenly spheres. Intercede for him and for his children, George and Theophano. And so there, like you mentioned, Stephen, it has specifically a reference to the church paver. It's not Emperor Constantine, but it's the church paver, Constantine. Right. And then it sort of, at least my understanding, has an intercessory sort of prayer over Constantine and his two children, referring to probably St. Peter, chief of the apostles and holder of the keys to the heavenly spheres. These seem to be very clear. He's talking about Peter here. My question, though, is based on that inscription, to me, it doesn't really seem like the church is necessarily being dedicated to Peter here, but it seems like it's more of a dedication, maybe even to the paver, Constantine, referencing Peter. So I'm curious, from a historical perspective, am I missing something here? Is this quote maybe dedicating to Peter? I guess I'm confused on that.
No, it's part of a Catholic tradition, the intercession of the saints. In other words, it's asking prayer on behalf of someone to a saint. That, again, this is part of the Catholic tradition of the intercession of the saints. But why not another saint? Why Peter? Why Peter here? He could have picked any other saint, but to select Peter, his intercession, on behalf of Constantine. I mean, can it be a coincidence? Sure, it could be a coincidence, but it's when you start adding it all up, you have a series of, plus you have the Byzantine tradition that this is a house built over don't forget Willibald. Let's not leave him to the side.
Yeah.
This is a tradition that it's built over the house of St. Peter. I would argue actually that, and I've written it, I actually think that tradition goes back before Willibald. I think that we already hear it in the 6th century from the anonymous pilgrim from Piacenza, who speaks about a basilica, and speaks specifically about a basilica over the house of Peter. So I actually think the tradition goes back even before Willibald, and
what is that? You said Piacenza, the anonymous pilgrim. What is that date to?
In the middle of the 6th century, 500. Okay. We have a pilgrim who comes, we don't know the name, that comes from Piacenza in Italy. And he once again describes pilgrimage coming around the lake and speaks of, he comes to Capernaum and then to a basilica built over the house of Peter. The only basilica in the vicinity is our basilica. There's no basilica in Capernaum. There's no Capernaum beyond us unless you go all the way around to Corsi. But it's not Corsi. And so once again, you have this repetition of tradition of Peter's house being commemorated and remembering there. It seems to lend itself, at least in my reading of it, that it's that you have this long-standing tradition. Again, I want to be very clear. We deal in a scientific manner. If you ask me, am I absolutely certain that Peter's house, and I would say, no, you can't, unless I find a plaque that says Peter slept here, some inscription like that. But you have a continuity of Christian memory that is being passed down. And you have Eusebius, who's the last voice of the Roman period in his Onomasticon, writing in 305. And he's remembering Bethsaida for one thing. Bethsaida shows up several times in the Gospels, but he remembers it as being the house of Peter, the place of Peter, Andrew, and Philip. So it's you have this continuity of tradition of memory. And I think that's sometimes something we miss in the West. We think that we dismiss oral memories in the East, and memories in the East are very, very long. Traditions are very long. In an article I wrote, I pointed out that we have the Damascus Gate is called in Arabic Bab al-Amud, which is the gate of the column. And that name remembers a column that hasn't stood for 1,500 years. So we're still calling it by the name of a column put up by Hadrian in the 2nd century, and continued during the Byzantine era, but it's been gone for 1,500 years. So we shouldn't quickly dismiss the memories that we have here. We should listen to them very carefully.
This is a piece of a larger conversation that I had. You can watch the full episode by clicking here, or listen to it on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you listen to podcasts by searching for Truth and Tradition. I'll see you guys there.